The girl in chains. The air in the slave market smelled of sweat, oil, and something rotten. Creatures of all kinds filled the space, some tall and thin, others short and covered in scales. The voices of merchants echoed through the crowd, shouting prices, calling out for bids. In the center of it all, Zara sat on the cold metal floor, her wrists and ankles bound in thick iron cuffs. She was nothing to them, just another item for sale. The aliens around her barely glanced at her. They were more interested in the strong warriors, the giant creatures with thick muscles and sharp claws. Buyers wanted fighters, killers, machines of war. Zara was none of those things. A slave trader, a hulking reptilian with yellow eyes, grabbed her by the arm and yanked her to her feet. "This one is weak," the trader sneered, his voice deep and rough. "But she's rare, last of her kind. Maybe she has some hidden value." The crowd laughed. A red-skinned alien with curved horns smirked. "She won't last a day. Who would waste credits on her?" Zara kept her head down. She had learned long ago that fighting back meant pain. If she spoke, she would be beaten. If she tried to run, they would break her legs. She was nothing. The bidding started, but no one bid. 10 credits. The trader called out. Silence. 5. Still nothing. 2. Even the cheapest buyers shook their heads. Zara's stomach twisted. If no one bought her, she would be thrown into the garbage pits, left to die. Then a voice cut through the noise. 50 credits. The crowd turned to look at the speaker. A human. He stood tall, wearing a long brown coat and heavy boots. His blue eyes were sharp, focused. His face was covered in scars, and his hands rested on the belt of his pistol. He didn't look like a fool, but why would a human pay 50 credits for someone worthless? The crowd murmured. The trader blinked in shock. 50. You're serious? The human shrugged. Do you want the credits or not? The trader licked his lips and grinned. Sold. The chains on Zara's wrists were unlocked, and she stumbled forward. The human caught her before she hit the ground. Get up, he said, his voice calm but firm. You're with me now. Zara did not understand. No one had ever helped her before. No one had touched her gently. She expected him to hurt her, to force her to kneel, but he didn't. He turned, leading her out of the market. That was when the alarms blared. A loud explosion shook the ground. In the sky above, dark ships descended, firing lasers into the marketplace. Screams filled the air as aliens ran for cover. The slavers are under attack, someone shouted. Guards rushed forward with blasters, trying to defend the market, but the enemy was too strong. A massive warship hovered above, releasing deadly drones. Zara's heart pounded. She had seen this before, when her own people were slaughtered. The human did not run. Instead, he grabbed Zara's wrist and pulled her behind him. He moved with confidence, like he had seen 100 battles before. This just got complicated, he muttered. Come on. Zara hesitated. Should she run? Try to escape? Maybe in the chaos she could disappear. But something inside her stopped her. The human wasn't afraid. He wasn't panicking like the others. He was protecting her. Why? Before she could decide, a group of attackers spotted them. There, the human. Take him down. Blaster fire rained down, and the human moved like lightning. He pulled out his gun and shot back, hitting his targets with perfect accuracy. Zara had never seen anything like it. The human wasn't just a buyer. He wasn't just some traveler. He was a fighter, a warrior. More enemies approached. The human cursed under his breath and turned to Zara. Listen to me, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. You want to live. Stay close to me. Zara didn't know why, but she nodded. The human grabbed her hand and ran. The market burned behind them, and Zara realized this was not an accident. Someone had attacked the slavers on purpose. And if they were here for the slaves, Then maybe they were here for her. A human's promise. Smoke filled the air as the slave market burned behind them. Screams echoed in the distance, blaster fire lighting up the dark sky. Ships soared overhead, engaging in brutal dogfights, their engines roaring like beasts of war. Zyra ran. She had no choice. The human, Captain Reynolds, held her wrist in an iron grip as he weaved through the panicked crowd, dodging falling debris and stray shots. Zyra's heart pounded in her chest. She had never moved this fast before, never felt the rush of running toward danger instead of away from it. Her legs burned, but Reynolds didn't stop. He was leading her somewhere. But why? Why was he saving her? She had spent her whole life being told she was nothing, worthless. And now a human had spent 50 credits on her and was risking his life to protect her. It didn't make sense. Ahead, a group of slavers in heavy armor blocked the path, weapons raised. Reynolds didn't slow down. "Hold on," he muttered. Before Zyra could react, he grabbed her and spun around, using his momentum to throw her behind a stack of metal crates. She landed hard, gasping for breath as blaster fire erupted. Peeking over the crate, she saw Reynolds facing the slavers alone. "You're making a mistake," one of them growled. "Hand over the girl." Reynolds smirked, drawing his pistol in a smooth motion. "You see, the thing about me, I don't like being told what to do." Without warning, he fired. A single shot took down the first slaver. Then he moved like a shadow, ducking, rolling, returning fire with perfect accuracy. The slavers barely had time to react before they were on the ground, silent, unmoving. Zyra's breath caught in her throat. This man wasn't just a fighter. He was a soldier, a killer. Why would someone like him waste time on someone like her? Reynolds turned, holstering his gun. "Get up. We need to move." Zyra hesitated. She could run. She could disappear into the chaos. But something inside her stopped her. She followed him. The escape. Reynolds led her through narrow back alleys, away from the chaos. His movements were controlled, efficient, like he had done this 100 times before. "Who's attacking the market?" Zyra finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reynolds glanced at her. "Pirates. Or maybe a rival syndicate. Doesn't matter." Zyra clenched her fists. It mattered to her. If they had come for the slaves, she needed to know why. They reached the edge of the market, where a sleek black ship waited. The Phoenix. It was unlike any ship she had seen before, its design both rugged and elegant, built for speed but armed with heavy cannons. Reynolds pressed a button on his wrist, and the ship's ramp lowered with a hiss. "Get in," he ordered. Zyra hesitated again. If she stepped onto that ship, she was putting her fate in his hands. She had been owned before, sold, beaten, used. How did she know this was any different? Reynolds must have sensed her fear, because his voice softened. "I didn't buy you to keep you, kid. I bought you to get you out of that hellhole." She stared at him. "Then what do you want from me?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Nothing." That word shook her to the core. Nothing. No one had ever wanted nothing from her before. She should have run. She should have distrusted him. But against all logic, she found herself stepping onto the ship. A new reality. The ship's interior was warm, clean, nothing like the cold, rusted cages she had been locked in for years. As soon as they entered, a small hovering droid zipped toward them, its metal frame blinking with blue lights. "Captain, you're late again," it chirped in a robotic voice. "And you brought a guest." Reynolds smirked. "Relax, Sparky. She's with us now." Zyra tensed at the word "us." The droid scanned her with a red beam. "She is severely malnourished. Dehydrated. Minor injuries detected. Should I prepare medical supplies?" Reynolds gave her a quick glance. "Yeah. And get her something to eat." Zyra's stomach twisted. Food. It had been days since she had eaten properly. The droid zoomed away, and Reynolds led her toward the main deck. The Phoenix was larger than it looked from the outside. This was no ordinary ship. "Why are you helping me?" she asked again, her voice stronger this time. Reynolds leaned against the control panel, his expression unreadable. "I don't like slavers," he said simply. That answer wasn't enough. Zira crossed her arms. "That's not a reason. No one spends 50 credits on a nobody." Reynolds studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You're not a nobody." The words hit her harder than a punch. She turned away, confused, angry, afraid. She wasn't supposed to believe things like that. Before she could process her thoughts, an alarm blared. Sparky returned, panicked. "Captain, we have incoming ships. 3 slaver vessels closing in fast." Reynolds cursed under his breath and turned to Zira. "Looks like they want you back." Zira felt a cold chill run down her spine. She had just escaped, and now they were already coming for her. Reynolds grabbed the controls. "Hold on, kid. We're not going down without a fight." The Phoenix's engines roared to life. Zira had a choice now. She could sit back and let someone else decide her fate, or she could fight. Learning to fight, learning to live. The Phoenix shook violently as the slaver ships closed in. The deep hum of energy weapons charging filled the air, warning of an incoming attack. Zira's hands clenched into fists. She had just escaped. She had just tasted freedom for the first time. And now, they were already coming to drag her back. "Buckle up," Captain Reynolds barked as he flicked several switches on the control panel. The ship's engines roared, thrusters igniting as they sped toward open space. Zira hesitated. She had spent her whole life in chains. Now she was sitting in a starship, free to move, free to act. But was she really free? She watched as Reynolds piloted the Phoenix with expert precision, dodging the slaver's first round of attacks. His movements were calm, controlled, deadly efficient. He wasn't panicking. He was built for this. The ship jolted again as an enemy blast scraped their hull. "Damn it," Reynolds muttered, adjusting their trajectory. He glanced at her. "You gonna sit there, or are you gonna help?" Zira blinked. Help. She had never helped anyone before. She had never even been allowed to make choices, but something inside her, a voice she didn't recognize, told her to move. "What do I do?" she asked. Reynolds smirked, motioning toward a control panel beside him. "Weapons system. Just keep an eye on their position. Tell me where they're moving." Zira slid into the seat, scanning the glowing interface. Numbers, tracking systems, ship positions. It was overwhelming. But then something clicked. She could see the pattern in the enemy's movements. They were trying to box them in. "They're flanking us," she blurted out. 2 on the left, 1 on the right. "They want to force us toward the asteroid field." Reynolds grinned. Smart girl. He twisted the controls, sending the Phoenix into a sudden barrel roll. The ship dove sharply, skimming the edge of the asteroid field before whipping around at an impossible angle. The slavers weren't ready for the move. Their formation broke. Zira's heart pounded. She had helped. But it wasn't over yet. "Take the cannons," Reynolds ordered. Zira's hands hovered over the controls. She had never fired a weapon before. She hesitated. If she pressed that button, she wouldn't just be watching anymore. She would be fighting. Another blast rocked the ship. Reynolds cursed. "We don't have time for doubt, kid." Zira pressed the trigger. The Phoenix's cannons roared to life, sending a wave of plasma fire toward the nearest enemy ship. The blast connected, sending the slaver vessel into a wild spin before exploding in a flash of red light. Zira gasped. She had done that. For the first time in her life, she had fought back. The remaining 2 ships pulled back, clearly realizing they had underestimated their target. Moments later, they disappeared into hyperspace, retreating into the void. Zira exhaled, her hands trembling. Reynolds let out a low whistle. "Not bad for your first time." Zira looked at him. I didn't mean to." He shrugged. "You did what you had to do." She turned back to the screen, staring at the empty space where the enemy ships had been. For the first time in her life, she hadn't been the one running. A new reality. Hours later, the Phoenix drifted through the vast emptiness of space. Zira sat in the crew lounge, staring at the food on her plate. She should have been devouring it. She had been starving for so long. But now, her hands felt frozen. She had killed someone today. She had spent her whole life being told she was weak, useless, nothing. But today, she had taken control. And it terrified her. Reynolds sat across from her, chewing on a piece of dried meat. "You gonna eat, or you just gonna stare at it?" She didn't answer. He sighed. "You saved both of us back there. If you hadn't spotted their attack pattern, we'd be scrap metal." Zira frowned. "I didn't save us. You did." Reynolds shook his head. "Nah, I just gave you the chance. You did the rest." Zira clenched her fists. "I didn't want to kill anyone." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "Then next time, don't. But don't expect the galaxy to be kind just because you wish it to be." Zira looked away. She didn't know who she was anymore. She had spent so long believing she was nothing that she didn't deserve to make choices. But now she had one in front of her. Reynolds leaned forward. "Look, I don't expect you to trust me. But I meant what I said. I didn't buy you to own you. You're free now. You can leave whenever you want." Zira swallowed hard. She wanted to believe him. But she had nowhere to go. "What if I stay?" she asked quietly. Reynolds didn't look surprised. "Then you earn your place." She frowned. "Earn? I don't do handouts," he said. "You want to be part of this crew. You train. You learn. You fight." Zira thought about that. She had spent her entire life in chains. But even though Reynolds had freed her, she realized something terrifying. She still didn't know how to be free. She looked at her trembling hands. If she stayed, she wouldn't just be hiding. She wouldn't just be waiting to be captured again. She would be learning how to survive. Zira took a deep breath and looked Reynolds in the eye. "Teach me." For the first time since he had met her, Reynolds grinned. "All right, kid," he said. "First lesson starts tomorrow. Hope you like bruises." The dark truth. The training started at dawn. Zira woke to the sound of alarms blaring through the Phoenix. Her body ached from sleeping on a real bed for the first time in years. The soft mattress felt unnatural compared to the cold, hard floors of her past. Then, the door slid open with a sharp hiss. Captain Reynolds stood there, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. "You planning to sleep all day?" Zira sat up, blinking. "It's early." "Lesson number 1, Reynolds said. Out here, there's no early or late. The only time that matters is when you're too slow to survive." Zira swallowed hard. She had asked for this, and now she had to prove she could handle it. Lesson 1, Fight or Die. The Phoenix's training bay was a cold, empty space with metal floors and reinforced walls. A few crates were stacked in the corners, but there were no weapons. Just Reynolds. And his fists. Zira stood opposite him, her heart pounding. "What? What are we doing?" Reynolds cracked his knuckles. "Fighting." Zira's stomach twisted. "I don't know how." "That's the point." Before she could react, he moved. Zira barely had time to duck before his fist shot past her. She stumbled backward, gasping. He wasn't holding back. Fear surged through her body, old instincts screaming at her to run. She had never been in a real fight before. She had always been the one getting beaten. Not this time. Zira dodged again, barely avoiding another strike. She couldn't win, but maybe she could survive. Reynolds suddenly stopped mid-attack. "You're not even trying," he said, shaking his head. Zira's breath was ragged. No excuses." His eyes hardened. "Do you want to be weak forever?" Zira flinched. Weak. That word. The word she had been called her whole life. Something inside her snapped. She lunged forward, throwing a wild punch, but Reynolds sidestepped easily. The next moment, she was on the ground, gasping for air. Reynolds crouched beside her. You hesitated. Zira gritted her teeth. She wouldn't be weak anymore. She rolled, kicking at his legs. He moved just in time, but for the first time, she saw surprise in his eyes, a flicker of approval. Zira forced herself up. Her arms trembled, her breath was uneven. But she stood. Reynolds grinned. Good. Let's go again. And this time, Zira fought back. Lesson 2. The past never stays buried. Hours later, Zira collapsed onto the training bay floor, sweat dripping down her face. Her muscles burned. Her hands were sore from throwing clumsy punches. Reynolds sat beside her, sipping water. Not bad, kid. She let out a short, bitter laugh. You knocked me down 20 times. He smirked. Yeah, but you got up 21. Zira looked away. She wasn't sure if she felt stronger or just exhausted. But there was something else in her chest, a feeling she didn't recognize. Pride. For the first time in her life, she had fought back. Then the ship's alarm blared. Sparky, the droid, hovered in, flashing red. Captain, we have a problem. Reynolds stood. Talk to me. The bounty on Zira just doubled. Zira's stomach dropped. Reynolds' face darkened. By who? Sparky hesitated. The warlord. Orion Rax. Zira froze. Orion Rax. The name that haunted her nightmares. The man who had wiped out her people. The man who had sold her into slavery. Reynolds turned to her. His voice was steady, but his eyes were sharp. You know him. Zira's chest tightened. She didn't want to talk about it. But she had no choice now. He's the reason I was in chains, she whispered. Reynolds didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he grabbed his gun belt. We need to move. Now. Zira blinked. Why? Because if a warlord like Rax wants you dead, it means you're a threat. Zira shook her head. I'm not a threat. I'm just. You are the last of your kind. Zira's breath caught in her throat. She had spent her whole life believing she was nothing. But if a warlord had doubled her bounty, then that meant she was something. And that terrified her more than anything else. The truth revealed. The Phoenix took off at full speed, slipping into hyperspace. Zira sat in the cockpit, gripping the armrests. Where are we going? Reynolds didn't answer at first. Then, finally, he spoke. To get answers. Zira frowned. Answers? Reynolds leaned against the console, watching her. Rax doesn't put a bounty on just anyone. That means you're important. Zira shook her head. I'm not. Stop saying that. His voice was sharp. I don't buy it, and neither does Rax. She swallowed hard. Reynolds sighed. Look, kid, I don't know what makes you so special, but if Rax wants you dead, then you're more than just some random slave. Zira looked down at her hands, her fingers curled into fists. Her past had always been blurred, fragmented like pieces of a puzzle she had never been allowed to complete. But now she needed to remember. Because if Orion Rax wanted her dead, that meant she had something worth killing for. And for the first time in her life, Zira wanted to know why. The Phoenix rocketed toward the unknown, and Zira knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again. The auction house of death. The Phoenix soared through hyperspace, but Zira's mind was stuck in the past. She sat in the dimly lit cabin, staring at her reflection in the window. The stars outside blurred into streaks of white, but all she could see was the dark shadow of Orion Rax, the warlord who had destroyed her people, enslaved her, and now wanted her dead. She clenched her fists. Why? Why was she worth more now than before? What had changed? Footsteps echoed behind her. Captain Reynolds leaned against the doorway, watching her. You haven't said a word in hours. Zira didn't look at him. I don't know what to say. You could start with what you remember. She shook her head. I don't remember anything important. Just bits and pieces. Reynolds sighed and sat across from her. Look, kid, I know this is a lot, but if we don't figure out why Rax wants you so badly, we're flying blind. Zira hesitated. She had never told anyone about her past before, but she had also never had anyone listen before. She took a deep breath. I was 5 when the war started. My people lived on a planet called Vasheri Prime. It was a peaceful place. We weren't warriors. We weren't part of any empire. Reynolds nodded, listening carefully. Then the warlord came. Zyra's voice hardened. Ori and Rax burned my home, killed everyone. He said we were too dangerous to exist, but I don't understand why. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. Too dangerous. What made your people a threat? Zira shook her head. I don't know. Reynolds leaned forward, tapping his fingers on the table. And he didn't kill you. He sold you instead. She swallowed hard. Yes. Reynolds muttered a curse under his breath. That means you're worth something. Something more valuable than just a slave. Before Zira could respond, alarms blared. Sparky, the droid, zipped in. Captain, we have a problem. Reynolds shot up. What now? Tracking beacon detected, Sparky said. Someone tagged us when we left the slave market, and they're coming fast. Zira's breath caught. Rax. Sparky beeped. No. Worse. A hologram flickered to life, displaying a massive ship emerging from hyperspace. It was sleek, dark, and unmistakably dangerous. Zira's stomach twisted. She had seen that ship before. The Crimson Dagger, Reynolds muttered. Damn it. Zira turned to him. Who are they? Reynolds' jaw tightened. Intergalactic slavers. The worst of the worst. And guess what, kid? They're not here to kill you. Zira's blood went cold. They're here to sell you. Captured once again. Before the Phoenix could escape, the enemy ship locked onto them with a tractor beam. Reynolds fought to break free, pushing the engines to their limit, but it was no use. The ship shuddered violently, pulled toward the slavers' docking bay like prey caught in a trap. Zira felt sick. She had fought so hard to escape slavery, only to be dragged back. As soon as they were locked in place, the airlocks hissed open. Armed guards stormed inside, their rifles glowing with plasma energy. Reynolds grabbed his gun, but before he could fire, a sharp electric pulse surged through the room. Zira screamed as pain tore through her body. She collapsed onto the floor, her muscles spasming. Reynolds hit the ground beside her, groaning. Heavy boots approached. A tall, snake-like alien in golden armor grinned down at them. Well, the alien hissed. The famous Captain Reynolds. And his little friend. Reynolds glared up at him. Raylo Vex, should have guessed you were behind this. Zira's heart pounded. She knew that name. Raylo Vex was a slaver lord, infamous for auctioning off rare species to the highest bidder. Which meant Zira's worst nightmare was coming true. She was about to be sold. Again. The slave auction. Zira and Reynolds were dragged onto a massive auction stage in front of a crowd of rich, powerful buyers from across the galaxy. The room was filled with creatures of all kinds, alien warlords, corrupt politicians, crime bosses. They were all here to bid on her. Zira's stomach twisted. She had been here before. She knew how this worked. The auctioneer, a large four-armed creature, smiled as he addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, today we present a very special item. He gestured toward Zira, the last known survivor of the Vasheri race. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some looked excited, others concerned. Zira froze. This was different. Before, she had been sold as a common slave, but now they were auctioning her off like a rare artifact. Reynolds gritted his teeth. If you people knew what Rax did to her people, you wouldn't be standing here like idiots. The auctioneer ignored him. We'll start the bidding at 1 million credits. Zira's chest tightened. Why was she suddenly worth so much? What had changed? A tall, cloaked figure in the back of the room raised a hand. 5 million, he said. The room fell silent. Even the auctioneer seemed momentarily stunned. Ah, a very generous bid. Zira's breath caught. Who was that? Reynolds glanced at her. His expression was sharp, calculating. Something wasn't right. Then, another voice cut through the air. I bid 10 million. Zira snapped her head toward the voice. Her blood ran cold. Because the man who had spoken, the one willing to pay 10 million credits, was Orion Rax, the last of her kind. Zira's entire body froze. The air around her seemed to vanish, replaced by the suffocating weight of the moment. Orion Rax was here. The warlord who had massacred her people, enslaved her, and then put a bounty on her head. The same warlord who now stood in front of an entire crowd of slavers, smugglers, and crime lords, offering 10 million credits to buy her back. Why? Why now? What had changed? She looked at him, her mind racing. He was larger than she remembered, a towering figure draped in dark battle armor, his red, glowing cybernetic eye scanning the room. The scars on his face told stories of countless battles, but his presence was what made her chest tighten. He radiated control, power, and a terrifying certainty. Zira had spent years running from the shadow of this man, and now he was here, ready to drag her back into the darkness. 10 million, Rax repeated, his voice deep and final. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some of the bidders glanced at one another, considering whether to challenge the offer, but no one did, because no one wanted to challenge Orion Rax. The auctioneer's many eyes blinked in shock. He cleared his throat. Ah, an incredible offer. Do we have any higher bids? Silence. Zira's heart pounded. She turned to Reynolds, who was watching the room like a predator. His hands were still bound, but his gaze was locked onto Rax. And for the first time since she had met him, he looked angry. Not frustrated, not amused. Genuinely, dangerously angry. Rax tilted his head. No takers. He smirked. Of course not. This one belongs to me. The auctioneer nodded eagerly. Then sold to. Wait. The voice cut through the air like a blade. Everyone turned toward the back of the room. Zira's breath caught as the mysterious cloaked figure who had first bid stepped forward. The figure pulled back his hood, revealing a human man, older, grizzled, with a cybernetic implant over one eye. His face was lined with experience, his stance relaxed but battle-ready. He was no ordinary buyer. I bid 20 million. The crowd gasped. Even the auctioneer stumbled backward. 20 million. Zira's head spun. Who was this man? Rax's smirk vanished. He turned fully to face the challenger, his posture shifting from amusement to aggression. The mysterious bidder stared back at him, unfazed. Problem. Rax? For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Rax laughed. It was a low, humorless sound. You're either a fool, he said, or you know something the rest of us don't. The man didn't blink. Maybe I do. Zira felt a shiver run down her spine. The auctioneer hesitated. Well, if we have a bid of 20 million, do we have 50 million? Zira's stomach dropped. Rax's voice was cold, final, absolute. Gasps filled the air. Some of the buyers were outright shocked at the numbers being thrown around. This was not about money anymore. This was about possession. The cloaked man narrowed his eyes. Then, slowly, he exhaled. I see. He took a step back, bowing slightly. Then it's yours. Zira's blood went cold. No. The auctioneer slammed his gavel down. Sold to Lord Orion Rax for 50 million credits. A cheer erupted from the crowd, but it sounded distant to Zira. Her breath was shallow, her mind racing. She had spent so much time escaping, so much time learning to fight, learning to be free. And now, In one moment, she was a slave again. Rax stepped forward, towering over her. Did you really think you could run forever? Zira gritted her teeth. She had fought before. She wouldn't go back. She turned her head, locking eyes with Reynolds. And without speaking, they both moved. The breakout. Everything happened in seconds. Zira lunged forward, twisting her body, shoving her shoulder into the auctioneer's stand. The impact sent him sprawling, and the nearby guards stumbled in confusion. Reynolds acted in an instant. He swung his bound hands forward, slamming them into the nearest guard's face, knocking him unconscious. Before the second guard could react, Reynolds grabbed his blaster, twisting the weapon in his grip and firing. A bolt of energy shot across the room, blasting the shackles off Zira's wrists. Her body reacted before her mind did. She grabbed the fallen guard's stun baton and spun, striking another slaver across the face. The entire room exploded into chaos. The crime lords and buyers scrambled for safety. Guards rushed to contain the breakout, and Zira and Reynolds fought like hell. Zira ducked under a laser shot, vaulted over the auction stage, and landed near the cloaked man. He smirked at her. "Not bad, kid." Before she could ask who he was, he tossed her something, a small data chip. "Find out who you are," he muttered. Then he vanished into the crowd. Zira didn't have time to process it. Rax was charging toward them. "Enough of this," he snarled, drawing a massive energy blade. Reynolds fired at him, but Rax deflected the shot with inhuman speed. Zira's chest tightened. They couldn't win this fight. Reynolds knew it too. "Zira, move." They sprinted toward the nearest exit. The slavers closed in, but they were too slow. Zira and Reynolds burst through the docking bay doors, racing toward the Phoenix. Sparky's voice crackled over the comms. "Engines primed. Get in, get in, get in." They jumped onto the loading ramp, blaster fire scorching the walls behind them. The moment they were inside, Reynolds slammed his fist against the launch controls. The Phoenix roared to life. They blasted out of the docking bay, escaping into the darkness of space. Aftermath. Zira sat in the cockpit, still breathing hard. Reynolds collapsed into the pilot's seat, rubbing his face. Well, that was a disaster. Zira didn't answer. Her hand was still curled around the data chip. "Find out who you are." Her hands trembled as she plugged it into the Phoenix's console. A file opened, a blurry image of her homeworld, and a single sentence. The Vasheri were not destroyed. They were hidden. Zira's heart stopped. Her people were alive. She turned to Reynolds, her voice shaking. "We have to find them." Reynolds studied the message. Then he nodded. "Then let's find them." The Phoenix turned toward the unknown, and for the first time in her life, Zira wasn't running. She was going home. Freedom and a new beginning. The Phoenix sped through hyperspace, the stars stretching into white streaks outside the cockpit. Zira sat in the pilot's chair, staring at the holographic display. The words burned into her mind. The Vasheri were not destroyed. They were hidden. Her people, the ones she thought had been wiped out, were alive. Somewhere. Her chest tightened. She had spent her life believing she was the last, that she had nothing to fight for except survival. But now she had a purpose. The plan. Reynolds leaned against the console, watching her. "You look like someone who just got punched in the face," he said. Zira blinked, snapping out of her thoughts. "I just found out my people are alive. That's a lot." He smirked. "Yeah. Well, what are you gonna do about it?" She hesitated. "Find them." Reynolds nodded, pushing off the console. "Good. Then let's get to work." Zira studied the data chip again. It contained encrypted coordinates, a hidden location, but she didn't know if it was a sanctuary or a trap. Reynolds pointed to a planet on the star map. "That's our destination." Zira narrowed her eyes. Eldorian 9. She had never heard of it. Sparky, the droid, floated over. That world is a dead zone. No known settlements. No major civilizations, which makes it a good hiding place, Reynolds said. Zira swallowed hard. If her people were really there, why had they been hiding? She had a feeling they were about to find out. Eldorian 9, the lost city. The Phoenix entered Eldorian 9's atmosphere, cutting through thick storm clouds. Lightning flashed, revealing jagged mountain ranges and vast plains covered in dense mist. Zira peered out the window. It looks abandoned. Reynolds steered them toward a canyon hidden beneath the storm layer. The ship's scanners beeped rapidly. There, Sparky said, a structure. Ancient. Large. Reynolds landed the ship on a rocky outcrop. The landing gear hissed, stabilizing against the rough terrain. Zira's heart pounded. She stepped onto the planet, feeling the cool air against her skin. The ground beneath her feet was cracked and dry. But ahead, a massive stone gate stood against the canyon wall, covered in Vasheri symbols, her people's language. Zira shivered. She reached out, tracing her fingers over the markings. "This is real," she whispered. Then the ground rumbled. A low, mechanical sound echoed through the canyon. The gate shifted, ancient gears grinding as it slowly opened. Zira stepped back. A figure emerged. A Vasheri. Zira's breath caught in her throat. The figure was tall, cloaked in silver armor, with piercing violet eyes. The same eyes Zira had. She had spent her whole life never seeing another like her. Now, one stood in front of her. The figure studied her carefully. Then, in a voice filled with quiet power, they spoke. "You should not be here." Secrets unveiled. Zira stared. I thought you were all dead." The figure exhaled. That was the point. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. Mind explaining why a whole species faked their extinction. The Vasheri warrior hesitated, then motioned for them to follow. They walked through the massive gates into what lay beyond. A hidden city. Massive stone towers rose from the mist, connected by glowing energy bridges. Vasheri of all ages walked the streets, their clothing a blend of ancient and advanced technology. Zira's heart raced. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. The warrior led them to a great hall, where several Vasheri elders waited. Their faces were etched with wisdom and sorrow. One of them, an elderly woman, stepped forward. Her violet eyes softened when she saw Zira. "You're Zira," she said. Zira nodded, feeling small under their gaze. "Why did you hide?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The elder sighed. "Because we had no choice." She gestured toward a holographic projection, a map of the galaxy, with a single point marked in red. "This is what Orion Rax was trying to destroy," the elder said. Zira squinted. "A data vault." The elder nodded. "The last archive of our civilization. It contains everything. Our history, our technology, our secrets." Reynolds folded his arms, and I'm guessing Rax doesn't want anyone to find it. The elder's face darkened. If he succeeds in destroying it, the last trace of the Vasheri people will be gone forever. Zira clenched her fists. She had spent her whole life believing she was worthless. Now she was being told she was the key to saving her people. She looked at Reynolds. "We have to stop him." He smirked. "Thought you'd say that." The final battle. The Phoenix launched into space, heading toward the data vault's location. But when they arrived, they weren't alone. Orion Rax's flagship was already there, and it was arming its cannons. Zira gritted her teeth. They were too late. Rax's face appeared on the Phoenix's comms. His cybernetic eye glowed red. "You just don't know when to die, do you?" Zira stepped forward. "No," she said, "and neither do my people." Rax sneered. "Then I'll erase them for good." The flagship's main cannon began charging, aimed at the vault. Zira's heart pounded. If that shot landed, everything would be gone. Reynolds punched the thrusters. Not on my watch. The battle erupted. The Phoenix weaved through laser fire, dodging blasts while returning shots with perfect precision. Zira jumped onto the weapons console, targeting the enemy's shield generators. She fired. The explosion rocked the flagship, weakening its defenses. Rax's ship turned toward them, launching a barrage of missiles. Zira's breath caught. We can't dodge them all. Reynolds grinned. We won't have to. He cut the engines right before impact. The Phoenix drifted, letting the missiles fly past, straight into Rax's own ship. The resulting explosion ripped through the hull. Rax's flagship shuddered, alarms blaring. Zira grabbed the comms. This is over, Rax. The warlord snarled. You think you've won. This is just the beginning. His ship vanished into hyperspace, retreating. Zira let out a slow breath. It was over. For now. A new beginning. Back on Eldorian 9, the Vasheri elders welcomed Zira with open arms. You have proven yourself, the elder said, and you have given us hope. Zira looked at her people, her family. She had spent her life running, surviving. Now she had a home. She turned to Reynolds. So, what now? He smirked. You tell me. Zira smiled. For the first time in her life, she was free. And this was only the beginning.